GoPro Hero 10, the Insta360 Go 2, the DJI Action 2 and the Insta360 One R with the 1-inch sensor. These are without a doubt the best action cameras you can buy at the moment. Each of these cameras has its own special features and its own particular strengths. But which is the best action camera, or which is the best for you, and which camera gives you the most for your money? That's what we are going to find out today. I have compared the cameras in detail and will give points for a total of 17 categories. 3 points for the winner of the category, 2 points for second place, and 1 point for the third place. The two cameras from Insta360 were provided to me by Insta360, so a big shout out to Insta360 for that. So let's get started. The first category is about portability. That is how big and heavy the camera is. For an action camera, one thing is clear to me. The smaller and lighter, the better. You feel less of the camera on your helmet or mount, and that is a clear advantage. And here, there is a clear winner for me, the Insta Go 2. In second place, the Action 2, whose camera module is only slightly larger and heavier, and in third place, the Hero 10, which is considerably heavier and larger. So 3 points for the Go 2, 2 for the Action 2, and 1 for the GoPro. For an action camera, it is important that it can be mounted anywhere. A particular strength of these cameras is that they can take shots at unusual angles. The camera should therefore be able to be mounted in as many different ways as possible, and ideally the mount should also be quickly changeable. For me, the best mounting system has the Action 2. The magnetic mount is simply ingenious. Especially if you own several base plates for the GoPro mount, you can remove the camera very quickly and easily and attach it to another mount. I see the Go 2 close behind. It also has a magnetic mounting system. This also works very well, but it is not 100% secure if there are strong vibrations or impacts. Then you have to use the action mount adapter. In third place for me comes the Hero 10. The mounting legs are integrated into the body, while on the One R it requires the frame. And of course you have to remember that all cameras use the mounts that were originally designed by GoPro. 3 points for the Action 2, 2 for the Go 2 and 1 for the GoPro. An action camera should of course be as rugged as possible. It should be able to fall down and absorb shocks without breaking. A camera that has to be treated like a raw egg is rather unusable as an action camera. And since I didn't want to destroy my cameras, I watched several videos with drop tests on YouTube. Nevertheless, I can only make assumptions here. Personally, I think that the Go 2 would probably win the comparison in a drop test. In fact, I dropped it unintentionally from a height of 15 meters and it survived without any problems, except for a small scratch, which I would highly doubt for the other 3 cameras. The lens cover is also easy and cheap to replace. If you were to hit it with a hammer now, the metal housing of the Action 2 would probably withstand more, and the GoPro and the One R probably would too. However, it's better not to drop the GoPro, the Action 2 and the One R without a protective cover. The displays in particular are fragile and represent a weak point. This is especially true for the GoPro and the Action 2. The modular system of the One R is said to be sensitive to sand. The lens cover will also break quickly, but it can be replaced easily, and the frame provides additional protection. The lens cover of the GoPro is also easy to replace. On the Action 2, however, this is not so easy. This leads to a significant point deduction in this category. If the lens cover breaks, you can no longer repair this camera yourself. That's why I give the Go 2 3 points, the One R 2 points and the GoPro 1 point. For me, an action camera should be waterproof. I want to be able to use it for diving or snorkeling without an additional case. I could theoretically buy an additional housing for any other camera. All 4 cameras are waterproof up to a certain point. The Go 2, however, only up to 4 meters. The One R apparently up to 5 meters. With the One R, however, special care is required when coming into contact with salt water because of the modules. The Action 2 and the Hero 10 are waterproof up to 10 meters. Although for the Action 2, this only applies to the camera module. The front display module is not waterproof. I therefore give the GoPro 3 points, 2 points for the Action 2 and 1 point for the Go 2. A display is definitely very useful even on an action camera. It is inconvenient if you can only check the framing using a smartphone. This also costs time. The Go 2 can therefore not score here. As for the other 3 cameras, the display of the One R cannot keep up with that of the GoPro and the Action 2. In addition, the One R does not have a front display. The decision between the Hero 10 and the Action 2 on the other hand is not so easy. The Action 2's display looks sharper and slightly better, especially if you compare it with the front display of the GoPro. However, the back display of the GoPro is much larger, which is a clear advantage when you want to check the framing. The Action 2's display also has a slight lag. The image lags a little behind when panning. For me, that's 3 points for the GoPro, 2 for the Action 2 and 1 for the One R. Well, now that we've looked at the body in detail, let's take a closer look at the image and the image quality that these 4 cameras produce. The first aspect that is important to me is the field of view, and here I think that a particularly wide field of view is an advantage for an action camera. The wide field of view has great advantages, especially for POV shots. You feel like you are in the middle of the action. Of course, I know that the wide field of view also has its disadvantages, such as distortions. The special thing about the Insta360 cameras is that the field of view can be changed afterwards. This is an advantage but also a disadvantage, because the camera itself only ever produces the same field of view. Here I give the 3 points to the Action 2. It simply has a fantastically wide field of view, even in the so-called D-Warp mode. The field of view of the GoPro and the Go 2 is similarly wide, depending on the setting. I give both 2 points. The One R gets 1 point. With the One R, you should also remember that everything up to a distance of 19 cm remains out of focus, but that has more to do with the size of the sensor and less with the lens. It can be a disadvantage when vlogging. Resolution is not always the most important thing for an action camera, especially if there is a lot of movement. Nevertheless, it can be an advantage to crop the image without much loss of quality. And of course, a high-resolution image simply looks better on a larger screen. The Go 2 from Insta360 cannot keep up here, because it only offers a maximum resolution of 1440, and you can see that in the shots. While the Action 2 can shoot in a maximum of 4K, the Hero 10 and the One R can shoot in 5.3K, and this difference is also visible, and it is here that the One R's 1-inch sensor shows its great strengths. The One R produces the sharpest image with the most details. By the way, this also applies quite clearly in 4K, therefore 3 points for this, 2 points for the GoPro and 1 point for the Action 2. But apart from the details, how good does the image look? What about colors, contrast and digital sharpness? Of course, this is largely a matter of taste. The Action 2 has a very contrasty image with cinematic but also somewhat unnatural colors. Its image looks like after a cinematic color grading. Personally, this is a bit too much for me. There is also no natural color profile. The Cinelike is currently not really usable in my opinion. The Hero 10 prefers more natural colors. It even has a slightly more desaturated color profile with natural, which I used for these comparison shots. If you want a little more saturation, choose vibrant. In the clouds, it creates a lot of contrast. Purely in terms of colors, I still like the One R a tad better. The image simply looks best to me. The One R also has 2 color profiles, standard and vivid. Of all the cameras, the GoPro is the only one on which it is possible to reduce the digital sharpness. This is particularly important for me, because too much sharpness doesn't look very cinematic. That's why I give 3 points to the GoPro, 2 to the One R and 1 to the Action 2. The image of the Go 2 doesn't look bad, but it just can't compete with the other cameras in a direct comparison. But by far the most important color is the color of the skin tones. And here, as I've already said in other videos, I'm not entirely happy with the extremely high contrast skin tones of the Hero 10. The skin tones of the One R and the Action 2 in particular just look more pleasant to me here. I don't like the skin tones of the Go 2 as much, they look a bit greyish depending on the situation. The choice between the One R and the Action 2 is not easy here, but I personally like the skin tones of the Action 2 best. So 3 points for the Action 2, 2 for the One R and 1 for the GoPro. Dynamic range is a very important element when it comes to image quality. How much detail can be shown simultaneously in the very dark and very bright areas of the image. These small cameras with their small sensors have difficulties here, of course. There is the possibility to use a flat profile on all cameras, which could increase the dynamic range. Personally, however, I'm not a big fan of this with these cameras, as details are often lost in low contrast areas of the image due to the strong compression. I looked very closely at these skiing shots and had the impression that with the Action 2, probably also due to its extremely high contrast look, the highlights burned out a bit faster than with the other cameras. The Go 2 lowers the exposure and loses a massive amount of detail in the dark areas. The Go 2 does have its own HDR video mode, but this only supports low frame rates. The GoPro and the One R performed similarly when skiing. In this indoor test, however, the GoPro could no longer keep up, as you can see in the back at the window. I give the One R 3 points, the GoPro 2 points and the Action 2 1 point. Shooting in low light is not one of the strengths of compact cameras with small sensors. A small sensor can only capture a relatively small amount of light. Therefore, image noise and artifacts occur very quickly if there is not enough light. It was also not easy to make an appropriate comparison, as not all cameras allow fully manual exposure settings or produce a differently bright image even with the same settings. Nevertheless, it has become clear that there is a clear winner here, and that is the Insta360 ONE R. The image looks excellent, sharp and detailed, even in the dark. The colors also remain beautiful. You simply can't beat the big sensor here. The GoPro and the Action 2 are very close. There is a detailed comparison test on my channel on this subject, and I see the GoPro slightly ahead. In last place is the Go 2. You just noticed that the Go 2 can't keep up with the bigger cameras in terms of image quality, but that was to be expected. So 3 points for the ONE R, 2 for the GoPro and 1 for the Action 2. Good slow motion shots are extremely important for an action camera. It should be possible, for example, to slow down recordings of sports, skiing, skating or surfing. And it should be possible to do so in the best possible quality. And this is where the two cameras from Insta360 cannot keep up. They both allow recordings in 1080 with 120 frames per second. In a higher resolution, however, both cameras are only capable of a maximum of 60 frames per second. The Action 2 and the GoPro Hero 10, on the other hand, allow incredible shots in 4K with 120 frames per second. That simply looks great. The GoPro can also shoot in 5K with 60 frames per second and in 2.7K with 240 frames per second. This is not a huge difference to the Action 2, as their recordings in 2.7K only look slightly better than the Action 2's recordings in 1080, but it does give the Hero 10 a slight edge here. The Hero 10 therefore gets 3 points, the Action 2 2 points and the ONE R 1 point because it also supports recordings in 4K 60. Besides image quality, good image stabilization is probably the most important feature of an action camera. Therefore, double points are given for this category. All 4 cameras have good image stabilization. However, both Insta360 cameras do not stabilize the image directly in the camera, but the stabilization is done with the help of the data from the gyroscope afterwards on the PC, with the help of a separate software. This is a disadvantage because you have to upload the files, stabilize them and then export them. And that takes time, of course. But then the stabilization is quite good, even if it can't quite keep up with the stabilization of the other 2 cameras. In my comparison of the 2 Insta360 cameras, the images from the ONE R were stabilized a little better, but the difference was minor. The quality of the stabilization of the Hero 10 and the Action 2 is very similar. There are minor advantages and disadvantages in each case. I had the impression that smaller movements, for example in a pan, were better compensated for by the Hero 10. With stronger movements, on the other hand, the Action 2 was a little better. The GoPro has to counter this with boost, but this leads to a strong crop. It is difficult to determine a clear winner here. I give the Action 2 6 points, the GoPro also 6 points, the ONE R 4 points and the Go 2 2 points. Let's take a look at the handling and settings options of these action cameras. It is clear that with a little practice you can easily operate all these cameras. Nevertheless, not everyone has the time to spend more time with a system, but simply wants to take a few quick shots while on holiday, for example. On the other hand, there are those who want to set everything manually and themselves. And here I find that the Go 2 is a little more complicated to operate than the other cameras. The camera itself doesn't have a display and the case only has a very simple display. It has also never happened to me so often on any other camera that I have unintentionally started a recording. The other 3 cameras are all similarly easy to use. The GoPro perhaps offers the most setting options, especially in the other modes such as the time-lapse or the photo mode. The Action 2's strength, however, is that it turns on extremely quickly and can also start recording the fastest via the quick capture mode. The ONE R is a little slower here. The Action 2 also has an internal memory, which can be useful for chaotic people like me. Another thing that bothers me about the ONE R is that you have to take off the lens cover to remove the SD card. Also, as I mentioned, you have to import all your recordings into the software first. All this leads to deductions. I give the GoPro and the Action 2 3 points each and the ONE R 1 point. Overheating and battery life. These were 2 of the most discussed topics in recent weeks, especially because the Action 2 but also the Hero 10 don't exactly excel here. So which camera can shoot the longest? That also depends on the settings and how you use the cameras. The small Go 2 from Insta360 is not made for long recordings. It simply overheats very quickly even without 4K. The comparison between the other cameras, on the other hand, is as usual not quite so clear. The camera module of the Action 2 overheats relatively quickly, but in combination with the front display module it lasts longer, and if you then reduce the frame rate in 4K to 30 or 24 frames per second and perhaps interrupt the recording now and then, it can record slightly longer than the Hero 10 and the One R, because the batteries of the two modules together last longer. In 4K 30, about 15 minutes longer. The battery life of the One R is about the same as that of the Hero 10. In my test it only switched off slightly earlier. Both cameras actually last a very long time. I think GoPro has made some improvements with the latest firmware. I give the GoPro and the One R 3 points and the Action 2 2 points, because the overheating still has certain disadvantages. Audio quality is not the most important point for many when it comes to action cameras. Nevertheless, you may want to vlog without an additional microphone, or just want to have a decent sound for your travel videos. So let's take a quick listen to the four cameras. This is an audio test, and this is the GoPro Hero 10. This is an audio test, and this is the DJI Action 2. This is an audio test, and this is the DJI Go 2. This is an audio test, and this is the Insta360 One R with the 1-inch sensor. The recording of the Action 2 was made together with the front display module. This results in better sound quality because the module has additional microphones. Personally, I like the sound of the Action 2 the best, followed by the GoPro for me, which produces the loudest recording, and then the Go 2. I would like to award a few extra points for special features that I like. The One R allows you to connect other modules, for example a 360 module. That is quite interesting and makes it a very flexible device. The Action 2 has a beautiful metal housing and has by far the best build quality of all the cameras. The case of the Go 2 can be used as a remote control. That is also very useful. I give the One R 3 points for the reasons mentioned, the Action 2 2 points and the Go 2 1 extra point. And we have a winner. With 38 points it's the Hero 10. But it was a lot closer than I actually expected. Does this mean that the Hero 10 is the best choice for everyone? No, absolutely not. The Go 2 scored the lowest, but personally I love this little camera and the whole concept. You can attach it anywhere, and the combination with the case is also great. For vlogging or shooting for social media, it's a good choice. It's also the cheapest camera in today's comparison, and there are always interesting offers. By the way, you can find links to all the cameras in the video description. On the other hand, if you want the absolute best image quality in an action camera, you should go for the One R. It's also great for shots in low light and indoors. In addition, you can also connect a 360 module if that interests you. For everyone else, I recommend the Hero 10 or the Action 2. Which one is better for you depends on your personal priorities, and I think the video has given you a good overview. So that's it for today. I'm going to take a few days off and go skiing. Give me a like as feedback if the video was interesting for you. There will be more videos about these action cameras. So stay tuned and see you next time.